The rain was coming down hard that morning, beating against the cracked windshield of Daniel's old Chevy, as he parked just outside the towering glass building that seemed to stretch into the clouds. He wasn't supposed to be there. At least not in the way fate was about to play it. He had come for something small, something desperate. A temporary janitorial shift he'd been told about by a friend. Anything to keep the lights on and food on the table for his 6-year-old daughter, Emily. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who cared about appearances anymore. Life had taken too much from him. His wife had passed suddenly 2 years earlier, leaving him to juggle fatherhood, grief, and the crushing reality of bills that never stopped coming. He wasn't dressed in a suit. He didn't wear confidence on his sleeve. All he had was his weathered jacket, calloused hands, and the quiet determination of a man who refused to give up for the sake of his little girl. As he pushed open the heavy glass doors of the skyscraper lobby, people rushed past him in polished shoes and pressed suits. He felt invisible. Until someone didn't just notice him. They mistook him for someone else. Finally, a sharp but elegant voice rang out. "There you are. I was beginning to think they sent me the wrong guard." Daniel froze. Guard. He turned, and standing just a few steps away was a woman who didn't seem to belong to the chaos of the lobby at all. She had an aura that commanded attention. Her black tailored dress fit like it had been made for her, her hair swept neatly back, her eyes carrying both exhaustion and strength. She looked like a woman who carried the weight of decisions that affected hundreds, maybe thousands. Daniel started to explain, but something in her expression stopped him. She wasn't looking at him as though he were less. She looked at him like he was exactly what she needed in that moment. "You're with me," she said firmly, walking past him and expecting him to follow. And against every reasonable thought in his head, Daniel did. Her name was Claire Donovan, CEO of one of the most influential tech companies in the city. Daniel only realized it later, when people in the building whispered as she passed, their eyes darting toward her with a mix of admiration and fear. Claire didn't give them the satisfaction of acknowledgement. She walked with purpose, truth, and Daniel, still clutching the strap of his worn backpack, trailed beside her, completely swept up in a role he had no business playing. At first, he tried to tell her the truth, that he wasn't who she thought he was. But then he saw the subtle tremor in her hands, as she adjusted her tablet, the faint crack in her strong facade. She was about to walk into a battle, and for some reason, she wanted him there. Something in his heart told him to stay quiet, at least for now. Today's going to be intense. She muttered as the elevator doors closed. She glanced at him. "You don't talk much, do you?" Daniel shook his head, not trusting himself to lie out loud. "Good, I like that. Let them do the talking. You just stand there and, well, look like you could throw someone through a wall if you had to." The absurdity of her words nearly made him laugh, but he kept it in. If only she knew. He wasn't strong. He was barely holding his world together. When the elevator opened, they stepped into a boardroom that buzzed with tension. Claire's presence silenced the room instantly. And Daniel. He stood behind her chair, hands folded, playing the role she had given him. To his shock, it worked. The room noticed him, broad-shouldered, serious, unshakable, and no one dared challenge her authority. He watched Claire fight for her company that day. Watched her stand tall against investors who doubted her, partners who questioned her leadership. And somewhere between the sharp exchanges and her quiet breaths, when no one was looking, Daniel realized she wasn't just powerful. She was human. Vulnerable in ways most people didn't see. It should have ended there. He should have walked away once the meeting was done, confessed the mistake, and gone back to his reality. But Claire looked at him afterward, her voice softer this time. "You did well today," she said, almost as if she meant it. "I needed someone to just stand with me. Thank you." Daniel swallowed hard. No one had thanked him in a long time. Days turned into weeks. Somehow, their worlds kept colliding. Claire asked for him again, at first as a joke, then as a habit. And Daniel, against his better judgment, kept showing up. He told himself it was temporary, that soon she'd realize the truth. But every time he looked at her, he saw not the CEO with unshakable poise, but a woman who sometimes needed someone to simply believe in her. The unexpected twist came one evening, after a long day. Claire had walked out of another grueling meeting, and instead of heading straight for her car, she lingered on the curb, her arms folded, her eyes glassy in the glow of city lights. "My father used to stand just like that," she whispered, "behind me, unseen, protecting me, even when I thought I didn't need it. He's gone now." Her voice cracked. "And for some reason, you remind me of him." Daniel's throat tightened. He thought of Emily, of how she looked at him like he was her whole world. Even when he felt like he was failing, he wanted to tell Claire everything, to finally reveal who he really was. But when she turned to him, her eyes searching, what came out instead was simple and raw. "You're not alone." In that moment, walls crumbled. Titles, appearances, roles, they didn't matter. What mattered was the strange, unexplainable connection between two people who had both lost more than the world could see. One night, when Claire unexpectedly visited Daniel's modest apartment, she met Emily. The little girl with messy curls and wide eyes didn't care who Claire was. She tugged on her sleeve and asked if she wanted to join them for pancakes. Claire sat at their small table, laughter spilling out of her in a way Daniel had never seen before. Feelings had crept in quietly, without permission. Not the kind built on grand gestures, but on simple moments of honesty and kindness. Claire began to see that Daniel wasn't her guard at all. He was something far more rare. A man who showed up when he didn't have to. A man who carried his own battles, yet still made room for hers. And Daniel, for the first time since losing everything, began to believe that maybe life had not ended with grief. Maybe it was just beginning again, in a way he never expected. Because sometimes, the most powerful love stories don't start with fairy tale perfection. They begin with mistakes, with misunderstandings, with two broken people daring to stand beside each other until the pieces start to fit. Claire hadn't planned on falling for him. She was a woman who built her life on structure, strategy, and control. But every time she found herself in Daniel's small kitchen, truth watching him flip pancakes for Emily or laughing at the silly jokes that made his daughter giggle, she realized control had nothing to do with the heart. Daniel, too, had kept his feelings locked away, convinced that his life was too messy, too unworthy of someone like her. He'd tell himself late at night that she deserved men who belonged in her world. Men with tailored suits and the kind of money that didn't run out before the month ended. But then he'd see the way she tucked Emily into bed, the way she sat cross-legged on the floor coloring with crayons, without caring that her dress probably cost more than his truck. And he knew none of those men could ever be who he was to her. The truth, however, still loomed between them. Claire didn't know he wasn't the guard she'd assumed. He was that very first day. Truth. And Daniel feared that when she finally found out, the fragile magic between them would shatter. It was a Saturday morning when fate forced his hand. Claire had stopped by unannounced with grocery bags, insisting she'd cook them. A real breakfast. This time, as she pulled out eggs and fresh fruit, there was a knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find his friend, the one who had told him about the janitorial shift. "Man, you never showed up for the job. They needed you to start last month," the friend said. Claire, standing behind him, froze. job?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. The secret Daniel had carried finally unraveled. He sat her down and told her everything. How he had walked into that building, looking for work to survive. How she had mistaken him for her guard. And how he hadn't had the heart to leave, when he saw how much she needed someone beside her. Claire listened quietly, her eyes never leaving his. For a long moment, the silence between them was heavy enough to crush him. He braced himself for anger, disappointment, rejection. But then she did something he didn't expect. She laughed. Not in mockery, not in cruelty, but in a way that made tears sting her eyes. "All this time," she said softly, "you weren't protecting me because you had to. You stayed because you chose to." Daniel blinked, unsure. "You're not angry?" She shook her head, her expression tender. "No, Daniel. You've given me something no one else has. Honesty, presence, love without expecting anything in return. Do you really think a title, a job description, or a misunderstanding could erase that?" For the first time in years, Daniel felt the weight he'd been carrying lift. And in that space, something new took root. Hope. Months later, their lives looked very different. Claire had introduced Daniel and Emily to her world. Not as a bodyguard, not as a shadow, but as the family she had chosen. At company galas, she didn't walk in alone anymore. Daniel held her hand, Emily skipping happily between them. Board members whispered, journalists speculated, but Claire never explained. She didn't need to. Because anyone who saw them together could feel it. The laughter, the warmth, the quiet strength of a man who once thought he had nothing left to give. And the brilliance of a woman who discovered that even the strongest leaders need someone to lean on. One evening, on the rooftop of her glass tower, overlooking the city lights, Claire turned to Daniel. Truth, her hand resting gently in his. "You know," she whispered, "the world thought you were just my guard. But the truth is, you've been guarding something much more precious all along." Daniel tilted his head. "What's that?" "My heart." And as Emily's laughter echoed in the background, blending with the hum of the city, Daniel pulled Claire close. For the first time in a long, long time, he didn't feel like a man who had lost everything. He felt like a man who had finally found his home.